This week, around 100 residents of Tiny Township gathered inside and outside Town Hall for a public meeting to provide feedback on proposed policies regulating property modifications in dynamic beach areas. A key feature of the policy is a 45-meter, approximately 147 feet setback from the 100-year flood level, which would limit where structures can be built or modified. Under the proposed bylaw, permits would be required even for minor activities such as digging a flower bed or repairing a deck. Several residents told Simcoe Community Media that the new regulations are overreaching and intrusive.
So now if they have to change a board on their deck, they will have to consult City Hall and have a permit issued to them. Cut down a tree, maintaining gardens. The bylaw is excessive. And I think honestly, as a backstory to this is the township's way of targeting the people that have been fighting back on this $25 million administration building that could cost up to $75 million, and also about the beachfront property that they just bought without appraisals that was $4.5 million, and by the time it's paid for will be $7 million. So the continuous pushback from this community is to prevent generational debt, and this council has issued these bylaws, I believe, as a response to infringing on the rights of the people because of their anger towards our resistance to their programs.
Town officials have stated that the policies are meant to protect the environment, but many residents have criticized the measures as excessive and restrictive.
They argue that these regulations are necessary to mitigate risks associated with erosion, flooding, and climate change. However, criticisms reflect the understandable concerns of property owners who feel the policies have significant implications for their land and investments. The ongoing debate highlights the challenges of balancing environmental protection with property rights in dynamic coastal environments. And I did a lot of research under the Ministry of Natural Resources and whatnot, and I couldn't find any articles where any tiny shoreline resident property owner was ever monetarily fined. So I said this from the beginning, this is a solution looking for a problem.
A lot of residents in our previous coverage criticized the council for lack of transparency. However, outside Tiny Town Hall, a pre-meeting discussion captured the spirit of healthy, passionate, and peaceful public discourse. Multiple Shoreline residents voiced their concerns to Simcoe Community Media and reiterated them during the official meeting. They argued that the proposed beach management policies are causing division between shoreline property owners and the broader community. One attendee, who initially appeared unfamiliar with the details, claimed shoreline residents opposed the bylaw because they didn't care about the environment and simply wanted to build closer to the water.
I own a corner lot, and we have bylaws, zoning bylaws that we have to adhere to. And because I'm on a corner lot, I'm not allowed to build on either the front or the side closer than 8 meters to the property line. So that does restrict me on the size of property that I want to build. So how different is that from what the waterfront people are facing? It's no different. We have to abide by those zoning bylaws in the same way that the waterfront people have to abide by those zoning bylaws. And there have been changes to the shoreline that have been affected in Tiny. Thunder Beach is one of them. And now that it's being enforced because there is climate change, that's a fact. It's not hoopla, it's a fact. Sea levels are rising, we're getting warmer, and that's it. That's all I have to say because science will speak for itself.
However, Shoreline residents clarified that they actually want to build farther from the water and find the proposed regulations overly restrictive, preventing even basic maintenance work without permits.
I've been in this township since I was a child. My grandparents bought here in the 40s. We've rebuilt a property right on the water. We followed all the regulations just like you have. The bylaws that I was subjected to in order to replace my building were the same ones that you do. The same requirements, setbacks, where you put it on the property, all of that jazz. However, this bylaw isn't just about where you put your building on your property. This is about whether you can or you can't locate a building on your property. 45 meters from the 178 mark is well well towards 2/3 of the depth of my property.
Well, and as I
2/3
said,
of the depth of my property. So just hang on, let me finish. So have you read the fine print in there? If I want to take a tree that's dying or overhanging my garage off my property, I have to get a permit. If I want to dig a garden bed on my property, I have to go get a permit.
By the end of the exchange, the woman acknowledged her limited understanding of the issue.
tell me, sir, with all due respect, why do you have to move closer to the water? You've got a beautiful view out there.
Away from the water.
I'm talking about moving closer to the pot.
In this case, inputs from other residents highlighted the value of open dialogue in helping residents grasp the complexities of local policy. During the meeting, the council extended an olive branch to residents by introducing a tiered permit system. Under this framework, no permit would be required for light maintenance such as gardening or sand sweeping. A Class 1 permit would apply to minor work like walkways or basic landscaping. Class 2 permits would cover moderate projects such as replacing stairs or small retaining walls. For major shoreline alterations such as installing protection structures or conducting in-water works, a Class 3 permit would be required, involving more detailed review. While the majority of residents expressed their opposition to the policy, a small number voiced their support. No decisions were made during the meeting. Council is scheduled to deliberate at a special session on May 26th. Following are our interviews and coverage of the meeting.
Tiny Township's dynamic beach management policies and bylaws raise several concerns, often focusing on the perceived impacts on property owners and development. Here's a summary of the common criticisms that the group of people have. Restrictions on property rights and development. A primary concern revolves around the significant development setbacks, typically 45 meters, which is 147 feet, from the 100-year flood level, imposed due to the dynamic beach designation. Critics argue these setbacks severely limit the buildable area on waterfront properties, impacting property values, ability of owners to renovate or expand existing structures or new ones. They feel their right to enjoy and develop their land is being unduly restricted. Perceived overreach and lack of scientific justification. Some critics question the extent and strictness of the dynamic beach designation and the associated regulations. They may argue that the scientific evidence used to define the dynamic beach areas is insufficient, or that the regulations are over precautionary and don't adequately consider the specific conditions of different parts of the shoreline. They might feel that not all areas are designated as dynamic. So basically what they're saying is the whole shoreline may not be all dynamic. It's some are eroding differently than others. And economic impacts and property values. This is a big concern for property owners. As mentioned above, the development restrictions are seen by some as negatively impacting property values. Owners may feel their investment is compromised if they cannot develop their land as they wish. They can also have broader economic implications for the township in terms of reduced development and potential tax revenue. Impact on existing structures and infrastructure. Critics may express concern about how the regulations affect existing legally established structures that now fall within the setback area. Questions arise about the ability to maintain, repair, or rebuild these structures. Similarly, concerns may be raised about the impact on existing infrastructure, roads, utilities located near the shoreline. Lack of flexibility and one-size-fits-all approach. Some argue that the dynamic beach policies are too rigid and don't account for the diverse characteristics of the shoreline. They might advocate for a more nuisance approach that considers site-specific conditions and allows for more flexibility in development, perhaps through engineered solutions or alternative migration measures. Concerns about the definition and mapping of the dynamic beaches. There might be criticism regarding the methodology used to identify and map the dynamic beach areas. Some property owners may dispute the designation of their specific property as being within a dynamic beach zone, questioning the accuracy of the mapping and criteria used. Potential for legal challenges. The strict regulations have led to legal challenges from property owners who feel their rights have been infringed upon. These challenges highlight the significant concerns and disagreements surrounding the implementation of the dynamic beach policies. To summarize, it's very important to note that the township's rationale for these policies is rooted in protecting natural hazards, preserving the ecological integrity of the shoreline, and ensuring sustainable development. They argue that these regulations are necessary to mitigate risks associated with erosion, flooding, and climate change. However, criticisms reflect the understandable concerns of property owners who feel the policies have significant implications for their land and investments. The ongoing debate highlights the challenges of balancing environmental protection with property rights in dynamic coastal environments. And I did a lot of research under the Ministry of Natural Resources and whatnot, and I couldn't find any articles where any tiny shoreline resident property owner was ever monetarily fined. So I said this from the beginning, this is a solution looking for a problem.
I own a corner lot, and we have bylaws, zoning bylaws that we have to adhere to. And because I'm on a corner lot, I'm not allowed to build on either the front or the side closer than 8 meters to the property line. So that does restrict me on the size of property that I want to build. So how different is that from what the waterfront people are facing? It's no different. We have to abide by those zoning bylaws in the same way that the waterfront people have to abide by those zoning bylaws. And there have been changes to the shoreline that have been affected in Tiny. Thunder Beach is one of them. And you talk about scientific dynamic beaches using scientific data and that you're not trusting it. Well, when someone wants to build, they're hiring an engineering firm to do a scientific study. So why is that more valid than the dynamic beach results? They're all scientific. Well, I'm using scientific. Whatever word is, it's just semantics. It's the same thing. You're basing it on information that you have. And we all have like the build. I mean, I can't build as large as I want to if I wanted to do it. And so why do we have to follow property standards and waterfront people are fighting something like that? That's the law. And the 45 meter from the high water mark has been in existence for decades and never followed. Council never enforced it. This council, it is.
Not 45. 15 meters. 15 meters, not 45.
No, the high water, 15, the beach hazard area, the 30 meters for the beach and the 15 meters for the flood level. That has always been in existence, and it's something that Ontario put in the MNRF. That's nothing new that we have today. It's been existing, and previous councils have never followed or enforced any of that, and they've always been allowed to do whatever they wanted to. And now that it's being enforced because there is climate change, that's a fact. It's not hoopla. It's a fact. Sea levels are rising. We're getting warmer, and that's it. That's all I have to say, because science will speak for itself. And if you want to protect your future, you protect it now. Because in Thunder Beach, because of the extensive development that has happened these decades, the beach has been altered already.
I've been in this township since I was a child. My grandparents bought here in the 40s. We've rebuilt a property right on the water. We followed all the regulations, just like you have setbacks.
They've changed.
No, they haven't changed.
They have in Ontario. I wish I had my article. When Toronto started putting in bylaws, as they progressed, bylaws were changing. They changed zoning bylaws to adapt to what was going on. So
The bylaws that I was subjected to in order to replace my building were the same ones that you do. The same requirements, setbacks, where you put it on the property, all of that jazz. However, this bylaw isn't just about where you put your building on your property. This is about whether you can or you can't locate a building on your property. 45 meters from the 178 mark is well towards 2/3 of the depth of my property.
well, and as I
2/3
said,
of the depth of my property. So just hang on, let me finish. So have you read the fine print in there? If I want to take a tree that's dying or overhanging my garage off my property, I have to get a permit. Do you have to get a? If I want to dig a garden bed on my property, I have to go get a permit.
Yeah, and it's all based
So
on
why am I,
the
what,
science.
what science
Yeah.
is it that I
Well, you know
have
what?
to go get a
Tell me,
permit
sir,
for
with all
that?
due respect, why do you have to move closer to the water? You've got a beautiful view of it.
Behind, away from the water.
I'm talking about moving closer to the box.
Well, that's an issue with me.
Why does the township
Get exempt.
get exempt? Why do they put a building on the 178?
Well,
Not
they're
behind.
coming-
They put it on. Why are they drilling there right now? Go down there and see what they're doing.
Township is exempt.
That's government.
Do you think one piping clover is going to nest in Palm Beach ever? Ever? Do you think one blade of dune grass is going to grow on Palm Beach ever?
But what if that
Why?
happens?
Why
do you
are
wanna
they
destroy-
exempted?
Why do you want to destroy the future for your children?
I said the township is
Nobody
not
wants
following the
that.
rules. Have them follow the rules first.
But you know what
And
happens?
we'll follow them.
You won't know until 100 years from now the significance and the impact of what has been
Do something
done.
away from your shoreline. If this affects my driveway, the back of my house has nothing to do with the front. That makes no sense. How is that protecting
But
the shore?
okay, so I don't know all of the bylaws.
That's
Wait,
why
wait,
I-
let me finish. But if you're building the garden bed and the driveway, if you're building the garden bed and the driveway, is that in the zoning bylaws?
Yes.
Okay,
You
okay,
can't even
so
replace a
follow
board on
them.
your deck.
Follow the bylaws.
It's ridiculous.
If your deck is broken, you can't fix one board without a shoreline study. That's
You can't move a
ludicrous.
rock.
You can't put a birdhouse up.
And why did the township change the shoreline at Jackson's Point? Big, huge, massive part of it. They were able to do that. They created over 500 feet approximately in front of, at the side of the Jackson's Point. They did that. They completely altered the shoreline. Fish, birds, frogs, everything was killed in front of there. They could do that, and I can't put a fence in my front or my backyard. Just really educate yourself before you pick a side.
The proposed shoreline bylaw is going to add an additional 30 meters. So originally, the bylaw that stands now, which has been sufficient for decades, everybody abides by it, it's within 15 meters of that 178 high water mark. The high water mark, if you are a shoreline owner and if you've lived here, you know that happens once every 30 years. It's a 30-year cycle. So we have high water about for 1 or 2 years, every 30 years. The 15 meters from that high water mark would certainly accommodate for the wave uprush or the high water levels. Adding another 30 meters from that to apply stringent, onerous, punitive bylaw, permit application, mandatory things, the expense, the coastal engineering study that's required is ludicrous. 45 meters from the 178 in Blue Water Beach goes to the road. To the road. I can't do anything on the exterior of my property. And when you're talking about environmental stewardship and that this bylaw has been touted as an environmental bylaw, it's garbage. The shoreline owners in Tiny Township are the most respectful and protective of our communities. So are the backlot owners. Every single shoreline has neighbors and community to the back of them. And we share our beaches. We've always been able to share our beaches and get along. This council is making decisions that is dividing our community without any support. They don't listen. For Stop the Build, we had over 1,200 petitions signed to just even pause it. To ask for a referendum. Hey, let's just have a vote again. Let's see if everybody wants it. Were we listened to? No. They will continue with their agenda while they are in power. And they'll point the finger at FOTSA and shoreline owners, and everybody else will say, well, the rich shoreline owners can pay for all of that. Or, it's the shoreline owners, so you have to look at the whole community. You know what? Shoreline owners do look at the whole community. We're very respectful, and we see it as each beach association We're communities, we're micro communities, all the way from the south to the north. And yes, we can be very, very different, and our landscape's different. What it looks like in Blue Water is not what it looks like in Wimblewood or Thunder Beach, for example. But you cannot put a bylaw in, a shoreline bylaw in, that is one size fits all. Absolutely not, because all of the shoreline of Tiny Township is that different. And we need to be heard. And there is middle ground. Why does it always have to be the extreme? This is an overreaching, complete control and power move for the shoreline of Tiny Township. It's egregious.
And I'd like to mention again, everybody, I did some research and nobody has ever been fined monetarily by any of these government agencies for wrecking the fish or any species or any system. And even Dr. Paul Bell is here with us today, and he knows everything about the environment. And Dr. Bell, have you heard anything about anybody being ever fined or polluting the water?
No. I think the worst polluters of the entire region here of the peninsula in Georgian Bay is Tiny Township. You look at Bomb Beach, you look at the beaches they own. That's where the pavement is. That's where the rock walls are. That's where the sand is raked every day. There's not a plant that could possibly survive on a tiny township beach that Tiny Council runs. The private people respect the beaches. Any beaches I've walked, and I've never been stopped walking on beaches that are privately held. I'm allowed to walk there. I'm allowed to bird there. I look at different plants. They're beautiful environments. There's the odd exception, but they're odd. Nearly everyone. The reason I moved here, the reason everyone probably here moved here, was for the water and the trees and the natural environment. That's why we're here. And we do a good job. Tiny Council, not so much.
Good afternoon. Thanks for coming in today on this beautiful afternoon here in Tiny Township. I'll call the meeting to order at 5:02 p.m. This is a statutory public meeting for proposed bylaw, municipally initiated official plan and zoning bylaw amendments for shoreline areas in proximity to Georgian Bay. And the date today is May 6th, 2025. So I will first of all just like to advise you, like every meeting that we have, this is being audio and video recorded. That just make sure that's in place. And we do have some freelance photographers here as well. So your participation here will be recorded through their means as well. So let's kick it off with our land acknowledgement statement. And Councillor Burnell has offered to do both for us tonight. Councillor Burnell.
Great. The Township of Tiny acknowledges that we are situated on what was once the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat Nation and Anishinaabeg people. The Township of Tiny has been and will continue to be an important homeland and gathering place for Indigenous peoples and Métis citizens. Altogether, we are the stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters, and we are to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. Le canton de Tiny reconnaît que nous sommes situés sur ce qui était jadis le territoire traditionnel de la nation Huron-Wendat et le peuple Anishinaabe. Le canton de Tiny a été et continue d'être une patrie et lieu de rassemblement important pour les peuples autochtones et les citoyens métis. Ensemble, nous sommes les intendants et gardiens de cette terre et des eaux et nous devons maintenir cette responsabilité afin de garantir la santé et l'intégrité pour les générations à venir.
Merci, Councillor Burnell. Thank you very much. As you can see from the dais here, where one of our councillors is remote tonight, Councillor Walma. Thank you very much for joining. I know you're working, and I appreciate taking some time out of your night tonight to participate. So, Council, I have an agenda before us to accept the agenda as presented. Are there any additions, updates anybody would like to make? Seeing none, the mover, Councillor Burnell. Thank you. Seconded by Deputy Mayor. Motion being that the agenda for the planning public meeting be accepted as distributed. All those in favor? Thank you. Councillor Wellman, I'll take that. Thank you. Council, any possible conflicts due to pecuniary interest at this time? As usual, if any do come up during the course of the meeting, please make us aware at that time, and we will deal with them at that time. Thank you very much. This public meeting is being held under the Planning Act and is being held this evening to welcome input from all community stakeholders. And thank you for those of you in person, and we have a number of people online as well. If you want to be notified of Council's future decision on any of the applications, please provide your name and mailing address to Catherine Maloney or through interimcontrol@tiny.ca. Anyone that has already requested to receive notice has been added to the notification list. The format of these meetings, a little different than our normal council meetings for some of you that have attended those. These meetings will begin with our Marianne Hunt, who is our Director of Planning and Development, and Jamie Robinson, who is a partner with MHPC Planning, who will both provide an explanation of the purpose of these proposed amendments. Please note that the names of those individuals who speak tonight at this public meeting will appear within the meeting minutes. The application being held tonight is for municipally initiated official plan and zoning bylaw amendments for the management of shoreline areas in the township, including dynamic beaches. I'll now call on our Director Hunt to kick off the explanation part. Thank you. Director Hunt.
Thank you, Mayor Evans. And yet we have Jamie Robinson, partner with MHBC, here to assist us this evening. So he'll be running through a PowerPoint presentation outlining the official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and shoreline bylaw, and giving a bit more information about those documents. And then after that, we would open it up to the public participation component of the evening. So I'll pass it over to Jamie.
Jamie, thanks for coming in tonight. Appreciate your support and look forward to your presentation. The floor is yours.
Perfect. Good evening, Your Worship, members of council, members of the public. As mentioned, my name is Jamie Robinson, and I've been assisting the municipality with the preparation for this meeting, but also with a background study related to shoreline development and managing shoreline issues within the municipality. So there's the presentation I'm just going to run through. So just in terms of order of events, I will run through this presentation. I intend to give a bit of a brief overview of the official plan amendment, the zoning bylaw amendment, and then I'll speak to, I think what most folks are here tonight to provide some input on is the shoreline bylaw itself. So we'll provide some information on all three of those bylaws, and then this is really a public meeting. The purpose of it is to provide residents an opportunity to speak to council and provide comments to council on those matters. Just right off the hop, we've received a number of comments in writing. We'll be running through some of the themes of those comments that have been received. It is completely fine when you're providing your comments to agree with other folks that have previously provided comments, or to refer to the fact that you've provided comments in writing. So we've got those. I say all that in terms of being respectful of everybody's time. I know we have a lot of people here that want to speak, so just to make sure that we have an opportunity to get through everybody that does want to speak in a timely manner. So I won't take a whole lot of time in my presentation because it is for the public primarily, but I think it's important to provide a bit of an overview of the process, where we've been, and what the documents contain. So with that, just in terms of project history, it's on the screen here. The key aspects of the project relate to the passing of an Aqua Solutions report that was first completed, which they looked at some details related to shoreline matters and policy implications related to shoreline development. The municipality enacted an interim control bylaw, and then they did seek an extension to that as well. We brought forward a draft dynamic beach management bylaw back in August for initial review. So what had happened is effectively all the background material that had been received and prepared by Aqua Solutions really precipitated the preparation of that draft dynamic beach management bylaw and draft zoning bylaw amendment and OPA. And then we did hold a public information center in February. So that was really an opportunity for people to provide feedback and comments. So there's two. There's on consecutive days we held those sessions. So just in terms of the zoning, the official plan amendment, so there's three documents at play, as I mentioned. The first one, the official plan amendment, that's the first sort of most high order tool in the planning toolbox. It's the document that sets sort of the 25-year plan of the municipality, of what the municipality is intended to look like in the future. What it also does is set some policy framework to help evaluate applications for change. So if someone wants to submit a zoning bylaw amendment, if they want to seek a variance to the standards on their property to build something, the document that's relied on for reviewing whether or not that should really be approved or not, that application is really set out in the official plan and the official plan policies. So what's been proposed as part of this exercise is some updated official plan policies to really set the stage for A, the zoning bylaw amendment, B, the shoreline bylaw, and then C, some policies for council to consider when evaluating applications for change, and then ultimately some policies to consider through the issuance of the shoreline bylaw applications. And I'll get to that, how that all interlinks in a moment. But there's really three components to that official plan amendment, or a setting the stage, and then also providing some policies which kind of work like criteria to evaluate applications. So that's the official plan amendment. The zoning bylaw amendment the zoning bylaw amendment, it provides some regulations. So currently there's a number of regulations in place in the zoning bylaw that provide some restrictions and really establish building envelopes within shoreline properties. One of those is that it requires development to be set back a certain distance from the high water mark. For accessory structures, boathouses, it's 15 meters. That's currently in the bylaw today. That's not being proposed to change as part of this exercise. The zoning bylaw also establishes some regulations with respect to how large your building can be, how far it can be set back from a property line, what the heights are, those sorts of items. So there are some tweaks to the zoning bylaw, particularly as it relates to areas where there could be dynamic beaches or where there are identified dynamic beaches. And then it also provides some additional regulations related to fences and retaining walls and those sorts of accessory structures. So that's kind of the role of the zoning bylaw. There's not a lot changing from what the current provisions are in the bylaw, particularly as it relates to principal buildings and structures, but there are some modifications. One of the key considerations with the zoning bylaw is ensuring there's some protection of legal non-conforming or legal non-complying situations. So most folks, their dwellings or their accessory buildings are located closer to the shoreline than what the bylaw actually allows for currently. So the zoning, one important component of this exercise was recognizing that and allowing opportunities for the quote unquote grant, the term most people refer to or the historic term would be grandfathering. So grandfathering of those existing legal non-complying situations. So the zoning bylaw today as it exists provides for grandfathering. The current or any proposed updates to the bylaw through this exercise also allows for that grandfathering. And where this all kind of came to be and why this exercise is being undertaken, one of the principal reasons is because from a provincial perspective, the provincial policy statement, provincial planning statement now, they changed the name on that recently, but it requires protection of dynamic beaches and flood hazards. And it specifically requires protection within 45 meters of the high water mark. So part of this exercise was ensuring that the township's planning documents were up to date and were consistent with that document. But we couldn't go, I'll say, as far as what the background studies identified should potentially happen, because there needs to be a recognition again of the fact that most of the shoreline properties are developed currently. So there has to be there has to be, and one of the items that we considered in reviewing and undertaking this exercise was providing that appropriate balance between protection of environmental features and protection of the natural shorelines, as well as providing an appropriate amount of development rights, particularly as it applies to existing developed properties. So that was one of our sort of objectives in undertaking this exercise, was to try to strike that balance. Next slide, please. So that provides a bit of an overview of, I think, the provincial policy, why we undertook this exercise from that perspective, a little bit about what the zoning bylaw was about and the official plan amendment is about. But really the key aspect of tonight's meeting relates also to the shoreline bylaw, which is something that's new. That's the new piece that's being proposed that doesn't exist today. So what I thought was the most sort of germane piece to spend some time on is to provide people with some examples of items where a shoreline bylaw permit would not be required, where it would be required, and what sort of the different classifications are. I think that's the most pertinent piece from a day-to-day application of the bylaw. And as I mentioned, part of our objective was to recognize that there's certain things that happen year over year that are kind of normal property maintenance pieces, and requiring permits for those things doesn't really make a lot of sense. But there's certain things that are kind of generational changes to properties or big ticket items that it would make sense in those instances to make sure we kind of press pause, carefully study the item, make sure it's not going to have an impact on neighboring property owners, and then issue a permit if it's appropriate. So those are sort of the class 3 permits that you'll hear about. But that was kind of our objective, is to recognize how that played out. And we also recognize that most instances where the higher order permits are going to be necessary, a Planning Act approval would also be required anyways today as it sits right now due to redevelopment. Most people today, if you've got a kind of generational historic cottage on the property and you're going to move up to retire to it and create your permanent home, today you need to come in and apply for some sort of variance to the standards of the bylaw. That's a sort of typical thing that happens. It's a substantial change to a property, and it's something that this process I don't think will impact, but it will also require a permit under this second bylaw, this shoreline bylaw, if it's approved by council. What we don't want to get in a situation of is that you get your zoning approval, but then you're not able to be issued a shoreline bylaw permit. We want to make sure those two processes coexist and work together in harmony. So it really shouldn't delay the timing aspect at all. So these are things we've been thinking about as we've been developing the project with town staff as well. So just a bit on there's some examples on the screen. I'm not going to go over all of them, but there's some examples of where a shoreline bylaw permit would not be required. So kind of standard, if you're undertaking construction outside of that 45 meters. So maybe I'll just pause for a second. So effectively what this document does is it puts a yield sign on everything within 45 meters of the high water mark. It says that, all right, the province under their provincial planning statement says if you're within 45 meters of these flood hazards or dynamic beach areas, there could be a risk. It's a similar situation to provincially significant wetlands or wetlands. They apply a 120 meter setback or area of influence potentially from a provincially significant wetland. In this case, we'd say 45 meters from that 177 contour. So then if you're in 45 meters, then depending on the scale of work or the scope of work you're undertaking, you may or may not need a permit. So what's identified on the screen are some examples of things that you wouldn't need a permit for. So some of the key ones that we got a lot of questions about were sort of the yearly relocation of sand or blow sand that comes up. We didn't want people to need a permit for that if it's minor. you'll see in the next slide, if it's substantial and you're bringing heavy equipment to remove that, there's a proposal, what we've proposed is that you would need a permit. Part of the reason for that is there has to be a line in the sand, so to speak, somewhere, because if people see, as soon as folks see machinery on a beach working or in front of a property, the phone starts ringing at the municipal office a lot of times. So we need to know that there's been some sort of oversight with respect to that. And the Class 1 permits are fairly, it's really a fairly quick and simple permit issuance. And it's something that we've thought about. Could be, if it's blow sand, for example, maybe it's a 5-year permit or a 7-year permit that permit lasts for that long, and you can come in and remove that blow sand every year with that machinery. So those are the sorts of things we're considering. The sort of gardening and removal of small trees and shrubs and those sorts of things, erecting snow fencing for blow sand or snow, those sorts of things would be exempt. Also some temporary event tents and those sorts of things. So those are examples of items that would not require a permit. Class 1 permit, so this is, we've really established 3 different classes, and this is because there's not a one shoe fits all size solution to this. So the idea is that if, like I mentioned, if you've got machinery in and you're working, we would just want to make sure that there's some oversight. For example, what you'd have to provide is a diagram that shows where the sand is year after year and how it's getting distributed. So it's not getting distributed in a pile on the beach, for example, it's getting spread evenly. That's the sort of stuff that we'd expect a permit or an issuance to include. If you're constructing a walkway that's within 45 meters of the beach and it's less than 1 meter in width, those sorts of things that require some site alteration but fairly minor, no excavation required. If there's some small removal of trees or limited removal of trees, those are examples of things that would also require a Class 1 permit. Same with landscaping. But again, these are permits that typically these are items these are site alteration type items, and they're sort of fairly minor in nature. As I mentioned, what this slide refers to is Class 1 permits that also align with some sort of a building permit. So issuance of a building or issuance of a permit to construct a building or structure, some sort of minor planning approval, like a minor variance or something to that effect. So these are some examples of constructing if you need a minor variance, and if you are permitted a gazebo, let's say as of right in the front yard, or a boathouse, in accordance with the zoning bylaw, you'd still require a Class 1 permit for the issuance of that. And that's really to make sure that there's that the establishment of that structure isn't going to have an impact necessarily on blow sand or impacts on neighboring property owners. Some grading also in accordance with township building permits and any development agreements that have been issued by the township would also require a Class 1 permit. Again, very simple, aligned with the building permit process, aligned with the planning permit process. It's intended that these wouldn't take any additional time or add any length of time to the process that's currently experienced with review and application. Next slide, please. So from a Class 2 permit, so this is where we get into some shoreline works potentially. So if you're repairing or replacing an in-water feature, or it could be a retaining wall along the water, and it's sort of a like-for-like situation, then you're into a Class 2 permit. The difference sort of between a Class 2 permit and a Class 1 permit is it's a bit more standalone. It's not covered through the zoning or the planning process, and requires a bit more detailed review on the municipality's part. So this permit would be a little bit more expensive than the Class 1 permit, where the Class 1 permit's intended to be quite inexpensive and be aligned with previous planning planning or building permit processes. If you're doing any sort of excavation or sort of increased excavation in the front yard of a property, or that waterfront yard between the dwelling and the shoreline, replacement of steps and stairs, those sorts of things, Class 2 permit is what's proposed under the draft scenario. Go to the next slide, please. So the next, the final class of permit really is the Class 3 permit. So this is when you're doing some sort of expansion or significant alteration, really something like installing a new shoreline erosion control measure, installing a new groin, for example, in-water works, those sorts of applications that are kind of, I sort of referred to it at the beginning of sort of a generational type thing that have the potential of impacting neighboring property owners. It's something that we're saying, put up a bit of a pause sign. Let's make sure we undertake a detailed review here. We get one chance to get it right, and let's get it right for everybody involved. So there's a bit more of an increased fee would be associated with a Class 3 permit, but that would really correspond with the level of review and time associated with that. So you can see some examples of things. And again, these are all items that are sort of occurring usually in the front yard for the most part. So between the dwelling and the shoreline, or in the water in some instances. But really, we're looking at here things that could really impact the property they're on, and the movement of sand and the movement of sand on that specific property, and how wave action could modify that property, and then also the neighboring properties as well. But again, it's not a prohibition, it's just a permitting it is a permitting process to make sure that things are reviewed appropriately, and that that what happens, there's really sort of some public interest in what's being done in those applications. So just in terms of I've got one slide left after this. So some of the key comments that we heard, and if you haven't reviewed it, there's a report that's on the agenda that we prepared, or a memorandum that provides a summary about these items that I've been speaking to tonight. But we did receive a number of comments, and some of the key areas are identified up on the screen. Some of the other concerns we heard related to sort of the increased processing time and how much longer it might extend the process to get permits. We know that the building season's short here, and because there's timing windows from DFO and other folks, and so we want to make sure that we do our best to have tight processing times where we can. And that's really what the no permits or Class 1 and 2 permits achieve, we believe. Class 3 will take some more time, but again, those are the larger projects that need that. Some concerns with increased fees we heard comments about. Again, there's a proposed fee structure associated with this, so the more simple applications, starting from no fee up to the more complicated applications, would have a larger fee. We had heard concerns from folks about the grandfathering piece and the reconstruction of existing structures and modifications on existing properties, and sort of losing development rights being a concern. Again, from our perspective, I don't think that these bylaws take any development rights away from what currently exists in the zoning bylaw. We think there's some protections in place. What it does provide is some protections that you can be assured about what you can expect to occur in your neighboring property owners as well, particularly as it relates to in-water works and shoreline works. We heard concerns related about the scope of this bylaw, and is it overreaching in light of the M&R requirements for managing shoreline works and in-water works, and also the township and also DFO, and also the township's ability to control and use zoning as a tool on land. And we feel it's a complementary tool that the shoreline bylaw is a complementary tool that really addresses one of the many missing pieces, which relates to the site alteration piece. We heard some concerns about lack of appeal and how if you don't get approval from staff, then your ability to come to council, and then ultimately if you don't get approval from council, your ability to appeal. There would be no opportunity for appeal, but there would be an opportunity to come to council and make your case. But one thing I want to be clear on is that in the draft shoreline bylaw and in the official plan, there are those criteria that are listed about when staff or when staff or council is to approve an application, what sort of things have to be met to get approval. So the idea is there should be an understanding of those making application submissions and those reviewing them, what the expectations are. So I think that's a key. We've always said through this process, a key aspect is of being successful in sort of any of these planning pieces is setting some expectations. So there's some expectations going in on all sides. So I think that really provides a summary of the key comment areas. Again, we've received probably hundreds of comments on this document, which we are preparing a comment summary table. There's been some more come in recently, so we've got to make some modifications to that, but we're providing responses to all the comments that have come in. So just in terms of next steps, what we're doing is considering comments from the public meeting. Just go to the next slide there. Considering comments that come in tonight. I said deadline for comments for May 12th. I'm hoping we can get that comment sooner than that. That's really our report deadline. So if you're able to provide any follow-up comments based on tonight's meeting, ideally by the weekend or by Monday, that would be appreciated. We are finalizing we've been working on our finalization of the documents since they were released. So there's some more to be done this week. And then the bylaw will be brought to council for consideration. The idea is later this month. What was the date? May 26th is the date that we've earmarked to bring it back to council. So that's sort of the next steps moving forward. With that, Your Worship, I think that provides my overview, and we're looking forward to hearing comments from the public. I just like to reiterate one.
For those just before we begin, ma'am, just those people that are online, just so you're aware, we do see if you raise your hand to speak. So I hope you can, while we go through this deputation, you can find the little yellow hand that's on the bottom of the screen. So that's how we'll identify you online. So we'll start with you, ma'am. Please, Bernard.
Good evening, council. Elected council for the people, by the people. My name is Stephanie DeFrancesca, and my husband and I own Shoreline property in Tiny Township. I'm here to express mine and my family's concerns and opposition to the township's amendments to the official plan and zoning bylaw, as well as the proposed shoreline bylaw. As a property owner, we exercise our right under the Planning Act to submit our comments regarding this proposal. Our concerns with the proposed bylaw are as follows. The interference with property maintenance and enjoyment. The bylaw will significantly hinder our ability to maintain and enjoy our waterfront property. The negative impact on property value. We are concerned that the restrictions imposed will adversely affect our property's market desirability and overall value. The unfair restrictions. The bylaw imposes limitations on the location of structures, landscaping, and protective fencing on our private property, which we believe are unduly restrictive. The financial and emotional burden implementing this bylaw will impose additional financial and emotional stress during an already challenging period for our family and our country. The lack of clarity and process. The bylaw is vague and overly lengthy. The inadequate guidance on the appeals process. We find it unclear who is responsible for the decisions or how residents may challenge the director's conclusions should disagreements arise. The inadequate community input. The development process for this bylaw appears rushed and has not adequately incorporated feedback from the entire community. The concerns raised by local residents have not yet clearly been addressed or resolved. Furthermore, we are deeply troubled by the township's alteration of the shoreline directly in front of our property on Doused Bay. The addition of approximately 500 feet of sand has significantly shifted the water's edge, extending it far beyond the natural boundary previously defined by our grass. I'd like to repeat that if I could. That we are deeply concerned that the township itself has altered the shoreline directly in front of our property. This is approximately in front of 12 properties. So it's a big parcel of land. This raises serious questions about the intent of the proposed bylaw. Specifically, we are concerned about the municipality's exemption from this regulation and its lack of accountability regarding its own actions that could and have already altered the shoreline. In light of these issues, I respectfully request, along with my family, that the proposed shoreline bylaw be reconsidered, as we believe the existing bylaws already address the township, ownership, and community concerns effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeFrancesca.
Thank you.
Council, any questions, comments? Okay, thank you very much for coming in. Appreciate your deputation.
Thank you.
Catherine, we could go for one online. Sorry, yeah, we're going to do one, we're going to alternate back and forth. The next person up is Iacobelli, Ms. Iacobelli?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Is it order the list? Okay.
I'm sorry, sir. Yeah, no, we'll make sure everybody gets to speak. Don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries. Catherine, do you show me on? There we are. Well, good evening, sir. Mr. Rouleau, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you,
Great.
Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Through
Floor is
Mr.
yours.
Mayor, I am counsel for the Federation of Tiny Township Shoreline Associations, which is known as FOTSA, and I'm also appearing on behalf of Denise Baker, who is the counsel for Nottawaga Beach Association and the Roundtree Beach Association. And all three of these associations represent directly or indirectly landowners who are directly impacted by the proposed official plan amendment, the zoning bylaw amendment, as well as the shoreline bylaw. And I'm here before council to provide oral comments on behalf of all three of these associations and to object to the township's proposed revisions to the official plan and zoning bylaw and to oppose the proposed shoreline bylaw. Comprehensive comments have already been provided on behalf of all three associations, so I don't want to take more time than needed, but I will just quickly summarize some of the points that have been raised in those letters. To begin with, there's no environmental conservation or scientific reports that really justify or support why it is necessary to rezone a particular area of the shoreline as the shoreline development areas. It is an arbitrary definition that has been made for the shoreline development areas, and it's the same area that's defined as dynamic beach hazard under the Provincial Planning Statement 2024. And this is further compounded by the fact that the township's consultants have produced a map identifying various beaches as being either non-dynamic beaches, possible dynamic beaches, or transition. And it's further compounded by the fact that property owners without access to waterfront are being caught by this very definition. There's no evidence that the proposed official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, or the shoreline bylaw have had regards to matters of provincial interest under the Planning Act or the PPS 2024. The permit system the proposed shoreline bylaw intends to introduce has not gone through the rigorous review process it should have. It will create a heavy administrative burden on the township and the landowners, and will require extensive technical studies and reports on a number of occasions. There's no evidence that the township has the human or financial resource to handle that volume of applications. With regards to comments that have been given by the public at the consultation meeting in February, many issues were raised on the Shoreline bylaw that still to this date remain unresolved. For example, concerns raised about replacement or maintenance of pre-existing structures along the shorelines were not substantially addressed, and this could result in a prohibition of a structure that is otherwise legally non-complying under the Planning Act.
Mr. Bruno, sorry, it's 30 seconds.
Not a problem. The proposed official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, or the shoreline bylaw affect over 1,000 properties along the shoreline. And there are many details to the proposed zoning of the shoreline development area and permit system that still need to be addressed. It is the submission of the three associations that I do represent that forging ahead with the proposed amendments to the official plan and zoning bylaw and to pass the shoreline bylaw is not in the interest of the township or its residents.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Appreciate you staying in that time. I realize it's a little short, but we do want to get through everybody tonight. So, council, any questions? Any comments? Mr. Rulo, thanks very much for coming in. I appreciate that.
Thank you for the
Have
opportunity.
a good evening. We're on to Ms. Iacobelli. Hi, how are you this evening?
Good.
The floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm just going to reiterate an email I sent to you, because I think it deals with the cause. Dear Mayor Evans.
Sorry, ma'am, can you just put the red button?
Sorry?
Just push the, is the little button in the middle there? That's it, perfect.
My
Now we've got
apologies.
you on. If you'd like to start again, that'd be fine.
Yes, so it's just an email I wrote to you, and I'm going to reiterate it. Dear Mayor Evans, I'm writing to you regarding the Township of Tiny Shoreline bylaw, official plan amendment, and proposed new zoning bylaw. My concern is a unique and specific situation that I find myself in at this time. I have owned the property of 932 Tiny Beaches Road South for about 27 years. This is a beachfront property and is adjacent to a public beach access walkway, which was dedicated to the township as a service road under Plan 876. There has always been a fence separating my property from the public walkway, which is very well used and often by loud and somewhat exuberant youths. Sometimes. We recently demolished the older cottage on the property and are now in the final stages of completing construction of our new cottage, which has all the necessary permits and complies with all the municipal and regulatory requirements. The problem I am facing is that as part of the demolition process and to facilitate construction, we took down the old fence along the public walkway and replaced it temporarily with a security fence, intending to replace the security fence with a new fence in better condition than the old. I have been advised by the township staff that the interim control bylaw currently in effect prevents me from replacing the old fence at this time, and that the new shoreline bylaw would also prevent me from erecting a fence along the portion of my lot line adjacent to the public walkway that is 45 meters of the 178-meter water line level, notwithstanding that I only intend to replace the fence in exactly the same location as it has been fenced for the last quarter century. I don't believe my replacement fence, I don't believe that my replacement fence would compromise any of the objectives of the shoreline bylaw. The township has approved my grading plan and the fence would not alter grading. There's no danger to erosion, beach integrity, or any of the things the bylaw is intended to protect from my proposed fence. Indeed, one of the concerns in the shoreline bylaw is that my proposed structure does not create an aggregate public safety or access issues, including impacts on abutting properties. My fence addresses this directly by increasing public safety for those traveling the walkway, increases mine and my own family's safety, and minimizes the impact on my adjacent property.
30 seconds, ma'am.
Sure. In addition, on a more personal note, the replacement fence provides my family and I with privacy and security as we enjoy our property and beachfront. It is a quite different matter to having your personal space exposed to one neighbor, only being exposed to the entire pedestrian community accessing the beach. I just included pictures for you to see it, and we were 6 months short of this new bylaw. Had I been told, I would have kept that fence.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Council, any comments or questions? No, seeing none. Catherine, if you could, somebody online that we have? Good evening, Ms. Cheeseman. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for receiving me online.
Thank you for joining us.
To the council, I was in attendance at the February meeting and posed a question which wasn't really answered. So I am here to pose the same question again. In that most bylaws are in response to a situation that has arisen within a municipality that requires that it must address some correction within the municipality. However, I don't know what the inciting incident was that caused the council to feel the need for a shoreline bylaw. So I would like to know what the specifics are around why Tiny feels that this bylaw as a whole is necessary. What were the incidents that occurred that caused environmental disruption, shoreline disruption, owners' access or lack of access, or if owners were acting egregiously? I would really like an answer to the question because I think all of this is excessive and unnecessary, burdensome on taxpayers, burdensome on council, and I'm pretty proud of the residents of Tiny because we are very proud of our shorelines, and I do believe we do what is best for our environment. So I know we're not allowed to pose questions, but I would love to have an answer to it if that's possible.
Okay, I appreciate your question. I will open it up to staff if you want to touch on it, but we'll certainly address it, if not today, certainly in the future for you. But here, Jamie Robinson has put his hand up, so Jamie, please.
So through your worship, I don't think there is a specific watershed moment, as may have been suggested, that bylaws are reactionary to. But what I think one of the main reasons, or two of the main reasons, are as I spoke about in the opening, implementation of the provincial policy statement and the dynamic beach hazard policies contained within that. And then secondly, the fact that there's no conservation authority that covers this geographic area. And it's typically in most jurisdictions in the province in Southern Ontario, there is a conservation authority and permits are required from them when you're undertaking site alteration or development in a flood hazard area. And in this case, the 45-meter setback is effectively that area. So that's one of the reasons why this jurisdiction is proposing the shoreline bylaw.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. Ms. Cheeseman, is that, if not sufficient, please feel free to follow up. And
well, I understand. I will review it and see to what degree, because I don't know about the Conservation Authority. This is the first I've heard of it, so I will review and follow up.
Perfect. Thanks so much for your question. Thanks for coming out tonight. Appreciate it. Thank you. Councillor Burnell, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, if I may ask a question to Jamie, Mr. Robinson, sorry. you keep referring to the provincial planning statement of 2024. I believe it will be section 5. I've read the whole thing today, and a little bit in the past too. In chapter 5, protecting public health and safety, under 5.1, general policies for natural and human-made hazards. I'd just like to read this, and there's a question I'm going to ask you. So, as development shall be directed away from areas of natural or human-made hazards where there is an unacceptable risk to public health or safety or property damage, and not create new or aggravate existing hazards. So my question is, in your opinion, is there any unacceptable risk to public health or safety or property damage that exists today in the Township of Tiny Shoreline area?
Jamie, are you able to answer that question?
Your worship.
Okay, I'm not an expert.
Oh, sorry, Janine. Sorry, Janine. Sorry about this. Sorry, Ms. Cheeseman. Let me use that. Ms. Cheeseman, sorry about that. Names are similar there. I was referring to sorry, Jamie Robinson. I'll go with that, and Janine Cheeseman. I'll come back to that. Okay, sorry about that.
Well, I was happy for Ms. Cheeseman to answer that question. Through your worship to the councillor, I'm not qualified to make that. I'm not a natural hazard, I can't evaluate natural hazard assessments or their impacts. But what the PPS does say, you are correct in what you stated earlier in terms of what that section reads. There's another section a little bit further down which kind of implements that. That's sort of a overriding statement, I guess you could say, what you read. But the statement that's below it, that's under section 523, says development site alteration shall not be permitted within. And then it says the dynamic beach hazard, and the flooding hazard. So it's what we're doing is implementing that restriction that's provided within the PPS. Now, the PPS defines development as Planning Act approval. In short, it's receiving a Planning Act approval, but the site alteration piece is really what this is in response to. And most conservation authorities deal with that site alteration piece, which we don't have. So.
Councillor, follow up?
Yes, follow up. So 5.2, natural hazards, number 3, you mentioned that development and site alteration, and you mentioned in your presentation that we're basically dealing with the site alteration component, which was missing in our existing bylaw, shall not be permitted within the dynamic beach hazard. So does that mean there's not going to be any development or site alteration in dynamic beach hazard? I just want to, there's a definition section of the provincial planning statement of 2024, and let me just read the dynamic beach hazard. What it means is areas of inherently unstable accumulations of shoreline sediments along the Great Lakes, St. Lawrence River system, and large inland lakes, identified by provincial standards as amended from time to time. The dynamic beach hazard limit consists of the flooding hazard limit plus a dynamic beach allowance. Now, I like I said, I read through the provincial planning statement 2024. I see nowhere that it mentions, excuse me, the 45 meter of the 178 meter GSC elevation of Georgian Bay. I don't see anything specific to those numbers. So perhaps we need some type of definition of, in my opinion, there's 3 areas, which is, it talks about right here. There's 3 areas that in the dynamic beach hazard, it looks like, and then again, I need some clarification from you, Mr. Robson, if possible, that the Ministry of Natural Resources of Forestry 100-year flood elevation, 178 meter GSE elevation. That's one section of the dynamic beach. Second, plus, so the second area is plus the wave effects, wave uprush, and overtopping flood component of 15 meters, which I believe in the in the PPS 2024 is the erosion hazard, and plus the dynamic beach allowance of 30 meters. I just want to get clarity in that there's those three sections that is mentioned in the provincial planning statement. Is this correct? So the first section is the flood hazard, the second section is the erosion hazard, and the third section is a dynamic beach hazard.
Mr. Robinson or Director Hunt? Clarify the definition.
Those areas are all part of that they all make up the dynamic beach hazard. That's correct.
Great, thank you.
Fine, Councillor? Good, good. Ms. Cheeseman's left. Okay, good. Thank you, ma'am. We'll go now to Robin Martin. I assume.
Your Worship, members of council, fellow residents, and thank you, Councillor Brunel, for asking questions. I wanted to ask, I'd like to know exactly what a dynamic beach allowance is allowing for, and that's nowhere defined that I could find. I'm here on behalf of my husband, John, and myself. We've been in Tiny for over 40 years, own 8 Roundtree Lane, and are therefore also members of the Roundtree Beach Association. As per our written submissions, my husband, John, and I oppose the Shoreline bylaw and attendant OPAs and the zoning bylaw amendment as well, hereinafter referred to collectively as the proposal. We all care about the shoreline, but no other municipality in the province of Ontario has implemented the provincial planning statement in the way that this council proposes to do. The township's proposal has extensive reach and intervention, asserting unprecedented control, and it purports to apply to every shoreline property in Tiny, asserting control over virtually every action, from planting and maintenance to construction, that might be taken within 45 meters of the 178-meter elevation line. Almost every action within that 45-meter area will require a permit, and many actions first require a coastal engineering study and the cost of a peer review of that study, which we have to give to council, so that owners will have to incur report costs of $10,000 plus before any action is taken on the property that they own. This proposal purports to apply without even knowing whether a shoreline property is on a dynamic beach. It establishes a reverse onus on private shoreline property owners. In fact, as a result of the 2005 Baird study, the township knows that some of the properties on Tiny shorelines are not on dynamic beaches. And the proposal nonetheless applies to every property as though it were on a dynamic beach. There is no justification at all for the proposal applying to a property that's not on a dynamic beach. And even if the property is on a dynamic beach, the MNR technical guidelines and the April 8, 2024 submission to this council make clear that the size of any hazard areas vary greatly depending on the actual conditions on the property. The township has said that this is similar to measures governing natural heritage features under the official plan, but natural heritage features have been mapped by the County of Simcoe and further refined by this township, unlike dynamic beaches. Further, identification of a dynamic beach is not property specific, but rather requires assessing criteria that go beyond your property or any one property. A dynamic beach must be a certain length, 100 meters, I think, have a certain thickness, have a certain fetch or reach into the water, etc. This is all in the April 8, 2024 presentation. The provincial planning statement requires that planning authorities, that's you, identify hazardous lands or sites, not that individual property owners do. The provincial planning statement also requires extensive studies and consultations be undertaken to ensure amendments are consistent with the provincial policy statement. Under 5.2, planning authorities are required to identify hazardous lands and hazardous sites. There's no evidence the township has undertaken extensive studies and consultations or taken steps to identify hazardous lands or sites on the shorelines of Tiny or within the shoreline development area in the proposal. People own their properties and have property rights that must be respected under law. It's not the role of Mr. Robinson, or indeed of this council or any municipality, to balance those property rights, which are otherwise respected by law, so that municipalities don't have those powers. They only have the powers given to them by statute. For all the reasons in our written submissions and given here orally tonight, my husband and I strenuously oppose the proposal, and I ask council not to proceed with it.
Good. Thank you for your submission. Okay. Catherine, anybody online? Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you,
The floor is yours.
for letting me speak today. My name is Helena Gerdolnik, a resident of 7 Balmoral Avenue in Edmore Beach. As per the letter I submitted, I'm in full support of the Shoreline bylaw as written, with no changes in the official plan amendment as well. Many beachfront owners already are good stewards for the important and environmentally sensitive beach areas, but the bylaw will assist with understanding and good practices now and into the future. I don't think, necessarily there's a lot of egregious things that are happening, as maybe that was the question from before. But in the future, we do see new owners coming in and deciding what to do that's not in keeping with good practices. So this bylaw is in line with processes to approve works to private property in environmentally sensitive areas across Ontario. Typically, they are in conservation areas, which we don't have here in Tiny. I am a principal of an architecture firm. We do work across Southern Ontario and often are working through processes like this on private property in conservation areas, other environmentally sensitive areas. So it's very in keeping with these processes, not unprecedented. This bylaw has precedent in regulatory frameworks, including the provincial planning statement, as we heard. Also in Wasaga beachfront properties that are under a conservation authority, it's a very similar process. So people who have brought up concerns about land values going down due to this or the process being onerous or unprecedented, our neighbors down the street already have this, and I don't think there's any impact other than the positive impact of keeping our beaches in Tiny protected through this bylaw, the maintenance and enjoyment of our public and private beaches now and into the future. So I just want to say that I'd like to give my full support to approve the official plan amendment and to approve the Shoreline bylaw. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am. Council, any comments, questions? Thank you very much for your comments. Have a great evening. Thank you. Okay, now on to Ms. Atkins. Great, thanks for coming in tonight.
Yes, thank you very much.
The floor is yours.
Mayor Evans, members of council, thank you for the opportunity to speak about this evening. My name is Margaret Atkins. My family and I are shoreline owners at 24 Addison Lane in Tiny. I'm 67 years old, and I've been coming to Tiny Township as a seasonal visitor and then as a seasonal owner for most of my life. And I can tell you from my own lived and experience of our family and every other shoreline property owner that I know, that there are no better stewards of the shoreline than those of us who live on it and want to preserve these properties not only for our current generation of owners, but my children, my grandchildren, hopefully my great-grandchildren and beyond. So the premise of this that seems to suggest that there's a concern on the part of council that current regulation is not adequate to protect the shoreline, I think is a flawed premise. It is our view, and I want to submit to you tonight, that the current regulations are fully adequate to address protection of shoreline properties. I'm not an attorney, so I'm going to leave the legal arguments to others, but suffice it to say that there is a tremendous amount, it appears, of legitimate legal basis to object to the bylaw as drafted and the amendments to the plan. And I think you're in for a major fight, which will be tremendously costly to the township to proceed with the action that appears you intend. And I would ask that you consider that economic consequence of this as well as you weigh your path forward. I want to make a couple of other points. One is that there are a tremendous number of properties that will be caught up in this. In fact, just eyeballing an aerial view of the township's shoreline would suggest that virtually every shoreline structure in Tiny will be caught up in this zone. Surely that can't be a reasonable level at which to draw a line for which no scientific evidence has been offered as a justification. So I feel like it's excessively vague, it's an overreach from a legal point of view, it's not necessary, and furthermore, if it's intended to be an environmentally friendly action, How do we then cope with things like the epidemic of common reed invasion that's happening along the shoreline, which I and many of my neighbors have worked so hard to eradicate in our own areas of the beach? The actions taken to do that will not be permitted under this bylaw. Surely that is not an environmentally friendly policy. And then lastly, I would say that there are many, many local businesses, setting aside the interest of the shoreline owners ourselves, many local businesses depend, especially in the construction and maintenance trades, on these properties as a basis for their livelihood in Tiny. And I think that you need to fully consider the economic impact, the adverse impact that this bylaw will have on those economic interests in the township, even if you don't have a reason to think that the shoreline owners per se are, and our objections are an adequate basis to stop your proceeding on this path. That completes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Atkins. Appreciate that. Ma'am, sorry, Ms. Atkins? Ms. Atkins? Ms. Atkins, Councillor Holoka has a question he'd like to ask you. Councillor Holoka.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. So the problem that I'm having is I witnessed a gentleman who lives on Tiny Beaches Road South who brought in a huge machine on a barge, brought it over to his property, and he started putting in steel plates into the beach. And we as a township had no way to battle him on that. So how do we deal? I'm asking for your help because I believe 99% of you are reasonable and great stewards of our beaches. But I'm asking you as a community, how do we deal with the 1% who think they can do that?
Well, I would say, again, I'm not an attorney, but it's my understanding that the Ministry of Natural Resources have prohibitions against many actions like that. We have, in fact, encountered some actions like that within hailing distance of where I live. And the MNR has weighed in to indicate that that is not a permissible set of actions and require reversal of those actions by the relevant property owner. So I think that there are mechanisms by which the township can work to alleviate the 1 in 1,000 situation like that comes up, because I really think it is so exceptionally rare. It's not reasonable to apply a new regulation that constrains everyone for the actions of an incredibly small number of individuals.
Councillor Loca, follow up?
That is the history of making laws. It's not for the 99% who abide by the law. It's not for the 99% who are good citizens. Laws and bylaws were created for those who think that the laws and bylaws don't pertain to them. And that's the struggle that I'm having, that we need something in place in lieu. Pardon me, you've had your
Ma'am, please,
say,
the crowd, again, I'll go back to what I said before.
You've had your say.
Councillor Loca, just wrap it up. This is about, we're just questions. We're not discussing. Yeah. This is May 26th. You can come back and listen to our discussion at that time. So questions are good.
This is the problem that I'm having. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Councillor. Deputy Mayor, please.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. Ms. Adkins, you had referenced that the MNRF has jurisdiction over that. I can tell you from personal experience, the incident that Councillor Holoka is referring to before I ran for council, I went to the MNRF. They have no teeth in this. Like Councillor Holoka said, it's for the 1%ers that think they can put in stuff into the ground. He's talking about the steel piles. And I can tell you from experience, it definitely impacts neighbors up and down the shore. A simple act, yes, it's to protect your property and to shore it up against floodline, totally reasonable expectation. However, the downstream effect of that is all that energy goes into a wall. That energy still exists. It gets displaced now and erodes the shoreline. And after speaking to the MNRF, there is nothing they can do. They said it's a municipality's issue, hence why this bylaw has been worked on for 2 years to try to get a reasonable solution, not to impact the 99% people, but to stop the 1% that are absolutely taking advantage and as a result, degrading the shoreline that you wish your great-grandchildren can enjoy.
So may I offer a suggestion in this regard? Sure. I think that one thing that would be incredibly helpful if you're determined to proceed with this, which again, I hope you do not, but if you do, I think it needs to be a heck of a lot more specific about first of all, what's the scientific basis for where this line has been drawn? Secondly, how will it be administered from the township's point of view? Because all the I guess, assurances notwithstanding about grandfathering of existing structures and ability to maintain them and such, the bylaw is actually silent on this point, and it does not provide any explicit assurances on that regard in the manner that was suggested would be included when the final draft was published based on the prior public meetings. That is causing a lot of concern and apprehension on the part of owners who do not feel that they have the sufficient clarity to understand how this new bylaw would be applied in their personal situation. So I think you really need to consider the specificity of the bylaw, make it clearer what the basis of it is scientifically, how it will be administered, what will be the criteria that staff will use to approve or deny a permit, and you need to rethink this point about there being no appeal other than coming back to this body to express concern if a person is ruled against, because let's face it, it's very, very rare in the land of municipal government that an elected body like this overrules the recommendations of staff. So I think there needs to be an independent basis on which decisions can be appealed by property owners if they think for whatever set of reasons that they're not reasonable. And there's no mechanism in this for that. So there are a lot of ways in which you could improve the draft to make it more acceptable, because you would provide clarity about how it would be implemented in a way that is lacking in the current language. And I think there's a lot of mistrust about this. I think these comments that from everyone tonight in the prior sessions reveal that. And I think that could be eliminated to a large extent by more clarity from you about how you will reasonably implement this if it proceeds.
Deputy Mayor, anything else? You good? Okay. Well, you're popular tonight, Ms. Atkins. You're not getting out yet. So Councillor Wama, then Councillor Brunel. Okay. Councillor Wama had his hand up there first. Councillor Wama?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Jamie or Mary Ann. The resident brought forward a concern over removal of common reed, which is phragmites for those that don't know the terminology. Does the current language prohibit the removal of reeds, invasive species, that kind of thing?
Start off with Mr. Robinson.
Through your worship, yes, there's no permit required under the bylaw. You can remove invasive species based on how it's drafted currently.
May I respond?
Ms. Atkins, please, yes.
Having removed a great deal of common reed from my beachfront, I can tell you that a well-established patch of common reed has root structure and webbing under the sand that is down 5 or 6 feet. There is no reasonable way to remove that purely by a hoe or just me getting down on the beach with a shovel. To eradicate a patch of well-established common reed, which can radically spread over an entire beach and destroy essentially the environment we're seeking to protect here, it is necessary to use mechanized means which would not be permitted under this bylaw. Without a permit, which to my point earlier, perhaps would be granted, but perhaps would not for reasons that are obscure based on what the language says now.
Okay, good. Thanks for your comments. One more question. Councillor Brunel, please.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for your deputation. Just want to read the proposed bylaw under definition 2.26. Hazardous lands means property or lands that could be unsafe for development due to naturally occurring processes. So I think what Councillor Holoka was mentioning, that we would like to have, as council, as a municipality, have some type of mechanism to be able to do something about what happened down at the Bomb Beach, the property that he was referring to. I have 3 questions. And that occurred in the flooding hazard, which is the 100-year flood elevation, the 178-meter elevation to the water's edge. So that's the flooding hazard. So my question, would you accept that portion of the draft bylaw as it sits if we just dealt with the flooding hazard area, which is from the water's edge to the 178? Would you accept the bylaw? Let me rephrase it. Actually, let me rephrase it. If we eliminated the erosion hazard section of the, which is the wave effects, wave uprush, and overtopping flood component of the 15 meters, which is from the 178 of the 15 meters, and remove the dynamic beach allowance of 30 meters from the erosion area hazard to, and that's called the dynamic, would you be satisfied with that alteration or amendment to the bylaw if we remove those two and then kept the flooding hazard area in the bylaw?
Ms. Atkins, you follow that question? I'm sorry, but Councilor Brown, you had a lot of
Yes.
stuff
There's
going
a
on
lot
there,
to
so
it.
don't feel like you have to answer that if you don't fully understand.
Well, I think it boiled down to if this only dealt with from the water's edge to 178 meters, would I feel better about it? Obviously, yes, because it would take away the extra 45 meters that you're talking about beyond that. And shoreline owners are not opposed to reasonable protections of the shoreline. Our position, my position, is they exist now, and we do our best to be great stewards of that. The devil's in the details. If you're suggesting, Councillor, Mr. Mayor, that there might be possible to redraft the bylaw in a way that
I'm not proposing anything right now.
Okay.
You're the one talking and giving information, so there's no supposition or going on right now.
Well, fair enough. I would say that any change that might come from council that reduce the amount of area that is being proposed to be regulated here to what one might view as a more typical shoreline buffer zone would be welcomed.
Councilor Bernal, you follow?
Thank you.
You good? Good. Thanks, Ms. Atkins. Thanks for coming in. Great. Okay, good. Thank you, everyone. Okay, we're those of you that are following online, if you'd like to speak, could you put your hand? We don't have anybody that would like to speak online right now. We'll get, if we don't have any, we'll just go through the list. We'll get everybody in here. Don't worry. But oh, they're all coming in now. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Good evening, Mr. Kostowski. How are you? Sorry if I didn't say that correctly.
Yes.
Kostowski.
Yes, sir. Good evening, everyone. I'm speaking on behalf of the Bomb Beach Community Association, the BBCA. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak this evening. I'm here to express the BBCA's strong support for the Shoreline bylaw without dilution. I think it's important to note that this bylaw is not a unique or novel concept. Many other areas in Ontario have already implemented similar bylaws to protect their shorelines. I think some argue that these restrictions will negatively impact the shoreline property values. I disagree. I believe the concerns are short-sighted. Areas like this will only become more valuable as they grow scarcer over time. I appreciate the discussion that just happened. I feel like a lot of the comments that are being raised are actually allowed activities like, landscaping that were addressed at the beginning of this presentation. And in fairness, if someone wants to, or someone needs or wants to bring a bulldozer to do work on their shoreline, I think it's not unreasonable that they should have to apply for a special permit to be able to do that. Any small change to the shoreline can have massive impacts to the ecosystem, to the biodiversity, to shore erosion. You do something on one side of the shore, and it can completely impact another side of the shore. So shoreline residents specifically, you have this beautiful beach, and then the next day someone, 10 cottages down does some construction, and next thing you know, your beach is gone. And that can easily happen. And we've seen it happen on areas of this shoreline. I feel like if given the opportunity to build, people will build. Fences, boathouses, retaining walls, and once constructed, these structures rarely disappear. Incrementally, bit by bit, the natural shoreline is gone. And a single retaining wall today, a boathouse tomorrow, eventually you wake up and you wonder where the shoreline went. Death taxes and boathouses. I feel like some of the opposition to this bylaw falls into some categories. There's a small minority that just, they prioritize their right to build over the community's interest. And, unfortunately, often they can speak with a really loud voice and make it sound like they have a lot larger numbers than they actually do. I think there's other people who don't fully appreciate how these small incremental changes add up over time, and they just resist more government regulation without seeing the long-term consequences. And third, I think that, you have those that agree with the bylaw's goals, but believe it has flaws. And, and to them I say, perfection is the enemy of good. The damage that will be caused by not passing the bylaw now is far worse than any perceived perfection within it. We cannot afford to wait for a perfect solution.
30 seconds, sir.
Continues to degrade. Passing this bylaw now is the responsible choice. And perfect example with the barge on the beach. People say it doesn't happen. We all look after the beach. But all it takes is that 1% to ruin it for everybody. And we need to protect against that. I asked the township to support and approve the dynamic beach bylaw and administer the bylaw fairly, responsibly, and intelligently, ensuring township staff are properly educated to balance shoreline protection with property enjoyment. A good idea executed well is better than a perfect idea poorly implemented.
You're all done, but thank you for your presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, any comments? Council, questions? Councilor Brunel, please.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the deputation. You mentioned that there are similar bylaws in other municipalities. Can you be specific? Because I'd like to be informed on which municipalities have similar bylaws.
Oh, I don't remember the specific bylaws. Other bylaws. When the organization first started researching these bylaws, there were a whole list of other. I think there's a bunch in Muskoka that exist. I can definitely follow up and give you a list of all those bylaws.
Okay.
This is not a unique concept.
For those of you in the crowd, that's what I want to hear. Thank you, sir. Councilor Brunel, anything further?
Thank you for your answer.
Great. Thank you very much, sir. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Okay, now we have Mr. Vanderheyden. Thank you, sir. Come on up.
Good evening. Mark Vanderheyden, 60 Wanaka-Wenning. I'll start off by saying, thank you for public service. The reality is it's hard. You got to hear both sides. And I truly believe township wants to do the right thing, whether it's better working environment for employees or protecting the beaches. So I'll start with that. I do believe that's what you want to do. A very good point was brought up just now about would you accept the 178 to the high water mark? We really have to think about what has to be protected and who's being punished by the other 45 meters in behind. So while I applaud what you want to do, I do ask you to think about how you're doing it. Trump can be applauded for wanting to make America great. Many of us disagree with how he's doing it. You give us an opportunity to provide input. What's wrong with what's here? It's the punishment of the generational owners. My wife's grandfather bought his lot on the beach almost 100 years ago. right? There's generational life going on there. To cut through and say, you know, you can't expand that 700 square foot cottage because you might want to have your grandkids or somebody there. That's wrong. So you have things in place. In 95, I helped work on the strategic plan at that point to ensure OS1 had certain requirements and prohibitions. So go after the 1% wrecking the shoreline. I don't like it. You guys don't like it. Go after that. OS1, the restrictions, they're in place today. Use those, right? The building bylaws, they provide setbacks from the 178. Use those. 45 meters back, punishing how we're enjoying our livelihoods, our lives. It's unfair. It's not a fight we want to have. We all want to enjoy the beach, beachfront, beach life together. And I ask you to adjust or not move forward with what you've proposed.
Great, thanks for your comments, Mr. Vanderheiden. Appreciate that. Council, any comments, questions? No, seeing none. Thank you, sir. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. Catherine, we got one on online. Good evening, Ms. Adams. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. Your Worship, members of council, and fellow residents, good evening. My name is Patricia Adams. I have been a resident and owner of Shoreline property on Roundtree Beach for 65 years and for 5 years at Cedar Point. Under this bylaw, which I am opposed to, Tiny proposes to give itself such vast powers to control our properties that it amounts to a regulatory taking. We will continue to own our property and pay taxes on it, but we will lose control over the maintenance and the care of our buildings and our lands. In effect, this bylaw is an expropriation without compensation. Now, why? I mean, what could possibly justify such an attack on our rights? Tiny says that it's necessary to save the dynamic beaches, and yet Tiny has not done the required studies under the law to justify this bylaw, to demonstrate that it's in the public interest, or to provide evidence that our beaches are indeed at risk. They are not. They are not at risk because shoreline owners and their associations have taken their responsibilities as frontline defenders of the beaches so seriously for so many decades that our beaches are healthy. Indeed, by restricting and frustrating the property owners' rights to protect the shorelines, this bylaw will have the opposite effect, and the shoreline will suffer, much as Tiny's public beaches have suffered from irresponsible management. But most fundamentally, Tiny's shoreline bylaw undermines our property rights, due process, and the rule of law. The bylaw is so vague, it's a point that other people have made, and uncertain that different permit applicants can be treated differently, effectively abandoning the rule of law and replacing it with rule by law. Section 7 gives Tiny the right to deny a permit unless the owner registers Tiny on title with a development agreement. This will encumber and muddy ownership. Section 10 forces an applicant who is denied a permit to make a final appeal to council, a political body, not an adjudicative body. This is not due process. Section 11 gives Tiny officers the power to conclude an owner has contravened the bylaw, in effect serving as investigator, prosecutor, and judge. This is not due process.
Ms. Adams, 30 seconds.
Section 12, thank you. Section 12 gives Tiny officers the right to, and I quote here, enter onto land at any reasonable time, close quote. The owner's right to exclude has been eliminated vis-a-vis the township. What could possibly justify this attack on the fundamental rights of Tiny residents to protect our beaches, says Tiny Township? It doesn't add up. This bylaw is about taking control of waterfront properties, not about protecting beaches. If it was, Tiny would protect the shoreline owners' rights, not usurp them. This will not end well. Property values will decline.
Ma'am, if you could wrap up, please.
Tiny's tax base, I will. And most important, Tiny's beach environment will suffer. I urge Tiny Township's council to abandon the shoreline bylaw. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Any comments, questions, council?